As now we are moving on forward, I'm excited to delve into our keynote speaker session, Autonomous Future. Our speaker, Michelle, founder of Envisioning.
Thank you so much. There's someone hunting down the clicker for me, so I'll entertain you for a few seconds while we find it. It's going to be a lot easier with the clicker. Thank you so much. Amazing. Thank you so much for your attention here today. And we'll wait for these to go. I suppose you're not tired of hearing about AI. And we're going to do a deep dive into what I think are fundamental skills and trends to understand the transition we're going through, which will build on many of the ideas that we've talked about so far. My name is Michel. I'm a self-proclaimed technology futurist, which means I try to make sense of where the future is heading, and I do that especially through the lens of technology. And for the last few years, I've been writing a weekly newsletter focused on AI, which has been a blessing, seeing how much interest is coming in this general direction. And it's been amazing to work with people who are actually applying these skills. What I hope to get out of the session today, and what you will get out of the session today, is a fairly advanced view into practical things you can be doing. I believe everyone has a role and a responsibility and tasks in the space of AI. It's an extremely technical field. This will not be a technical lecture. There are many, many good places to go for that. But what I hope that you will perceive through this is to build up some of your strategic skills and some of your technical insight. In other words, the ideal outcome is one where you have some responsibility using AI in your organizations or even in your personal lives, as well as some degree of technical literacy about this. Again, it's not going to be a profound, it's not going to be math or science-oriented, but really looking at practical things you can do to strengthen your relationship with these tools, which are developing quickly and changing very rapidly, as well as build up some practical things that you can do in your work. And it will be very meme-heavy. So you'll get a second chance at looking at the slides after, because we're going to go through them quickly. And but more specifically, you're going to build some strategic skills as well as practical applications of this, and hopefully build better foundations that you can use in your organization moving forward. I want to get a quick sense from you guys. So yeah, bring out your phones if they're not already out. I want to get a quick sense through a quick Slido, which has two questions on it. First, you're going to help me gauge how often you're using AI. And you're going to have 5 options. Either you've never used it, in which case, welcome. Or you're using it every month. You might be using it every week. You might be using it every day. And if you're like me, you're using it right now. So I can see the results coming in. You're also able to see the results, right, on your devices? So we're voting. We'll wait a few more seconds. You're going to answer 2 questions. How often you're using it, as well as how you're using it. So what are some applications? What are some practical things that you're doing with AI? We're going to wait another minute or so. I see we've gotten 43 responses. And most of you are using it every day. That's amazing. So going a little bit against the stats that Acacia showed earlier, where surprisingly most type people are not using GPT on a daily basis, or not even using it. I'm happy to see that most of you are using it daily, or if not daily, at least weekly. And let's switch over to the word cloud. How are you using it? What we see here is research and looking for ideas, asking questions, asking to analyze data, random, that's a good one, trends, supporting your work, analysis, summarizations, search, excellent. So we know where we're at. Let's go back to the overview. We have 130 responses, and narrowly winning out is the daily access. Amazing. This is the interactive part of the session. Now let's go back to the slides. I'm coming from a position of spending a lot of time talking to companies about the implications of technology. I have the privilege of working with amazing organizations who come to us, to my company, in search of insight when it comes to emerging technology. And of course, increasingly, the one question everyone asks is, what about AI? What do we do with this? We work both with public and private organizations, so I'm happy to see that there's a similar mix in the audience of responsibilities, both on the corporate and the government side. This is the backbone of the session today. We're going to talk to 10 rapid-fire chapters, which will hopefully build up towards a vision of superintelligence, which is, I think, where we're going to land in a couple of years. We're going to talk about, we're going to start by looking at exponential change, which is arguably the strongest driver behind all of technology. All of emerging technology, especially information technology, relies on something called exponential change, or Moore's law, as some of you might have heard. And what it says is basically things get faster, but they also get cheaper faster. In other words, the cost of computation keeps going down, the cost of storage keeps going down. This means we can unlock many new abilities when it comes to using technology and deploying them in new fields. This is the reason why we see technology popping up everywhere in our lifetimes. This was observed originally in the late 60s, early 70s, that the capacity of computation was doubling approximately every 2 years, and it remains to this day. So we have a constant pressure of ability and cost affecting what technology does. And the consequence of this is it messes with our expectations. So the image here on the right is, it used to be the case until a while ago when we asked an image model to make to portray a handshake, is it came out with these sort of mangled hands. But as I was preparing the session a while ago, this of course is what Midjourney looks like today. It creates a perfectly natural image. We can't tell it apart from an actual photo. But it still doesn't mean you don't have to be specific. If you ask for salmon jumping upriver, this is what you might get. This is an actual Midjourney image. And it means you have to be extremely particular, and you have to know your words in how you interact with these tools. And that's a little bit of what we're going to be looking at throughout the next chapters. And technology moves in a certain direction. It evolves in a particular way that is extremely predictable, I want to say. If you've spent some time observing it, it means every artifact, every device, every technology we use has sort of a visible history of what led up to it and how different technologies build on one another in order to create new abilities. And technology changes our expectations. It used to be that we had to hunt when we were hungry. Now we tap, and it's very difficult to go back. Once we've become accustomed to a certain technological capacity, it is very, very difficult to undo that knowledge and somehow change our expectations to be simpler. And this applies to all trends, but I think when it comes to technology, it drives deeper, and it's much, much, much more difficult to undo because nothing comes after it, only more technology. And technology is everything we make, everything we create, everything that isn't of the natural world is technological in nature, everything we've built, agriculture, money, not just the bills and the coins, but the notion of storing value in an object and handing that object over to someone else is a technology. The other person believes in the same illusion you do, and that is a technology. All these images were made in Midjourney, by the way, not a single photo in the talk. And these technologies build on one another. AI is just the most recent of them, and AI is a combination of many, many, many fields of research that is absolutely not going away, right? If we're tired of hearing of it, it's absolutely only going to keep increasing. And AI sits at this peculiar intersection of, it's a little bit of data science, it's a little bit of mathematics, it's a little bit of statistics, it's psychology, philosophy. All these fields interact to compose what we call AI, which means that every expert in AI has a very particular perception and set of skills. Nobody's good at all of these things, except for AI, of course, which knows these bits. But individually, we all know one slice of the pie, and we learn that, and that's the view we bring to AI. I'm not an expert on most of these fields, but I find myself at the intersection trying to make sense of the combination of them. And there are so many milestones. Every day, every week, every month, we pull up the news and we say, okay, there's been another breakthrough, there's been another massive sea change in technological capability. I asked GPT and Claude and Gemini to come up with what are the key milestones of the last decade or so in AI, and this is a few of them, and as you can see, they keep increasing. Every single one of them is the result of numerous research papers, billions of dollars of investment, or millions of hours of time commitment to come up with them, and they build on one another. They're not going away. It's not going to change. This means that our expectations of the world are often in mismatch. There's this wonderful quote to help us understand how the future affects us, which is we tend to overestimate the short-term effects while we underestimate the long-term effects. In the short term, we think technology will change our lives a lot more than it actually does, whereas in the long term, technology takes off and actually far exceeds how we thought it was going to play out. And I think it's best characterized by this sort of exponential curve of technological reality taking off, while we have linear expectations of the world. The tricky thing here is this is true even when we know it's true, so you have to keep compensating and recalibrating our expectations to make sense of where things are going. And these models are only getting better. This is the last 2 years of Midjourney. Same prompt, completely different images, right, being output. And on the right, we have the leaderboards of language models. And I think month by month, you see how every company, well, every AI company is competing with every other AI company, and their capacities keep going up, right? We have GPT at the top, but every other model, that's a Chinese one popping up there, every other model is sort of nudging up and reaching similar scores. An interesting note is while adoption is really fast and high, retention tends to be low. So on the left, we have the number of days it took to reach, I think, 1,100,000,000 users, which is, I mean, ChatGPT is a straight line up compared to everything else, whereas retention, which are the purple bits on the right side, is kind of lower than most sticky apps. Instagram and TikTok are sky high, GPT and others. People aren't really finding their use cases for it yet. It's a matter of time. And one of my favorite slides in this presentation is there are so many kinds of AI. We're stuck talking about generative AI most of the time because it's the one that is making the most change right now, but it's just one of the models. For many, many years, we had predictive AI, we had something called limited memory AI. All of these things are true. If your rice cooker says it has AI, it's literally true. It's a form of AI called reactive machines. And it uses a set of principles, which is different from generative, which is different from autonomous, and so on. But they're all forms of AI. And if you're thinking about where to position yourself as a business leader, this is the slide where I would help you sort of think about where in the stack to land. What I've tried doing here is to outline the different roles one can have in the ever-growing pie that is AI. On the top, you have the hardware manufacturers, the TSMCs, and at the bottom, you have the functionalities. It's not even an AI app. Your Netflix recommendation system is an AI, but you don't think about it that way. It just tells you a good movie to watch. And what I find one valuable way to keep track of what's going on is to look at what's happening at the frontiers. So the frontier of AI is tricky because we have this phenomenon called the jagged edge. We expect things to be much more capable than they actually are. That's why it's sometimes frustrating to use Siri. Siri is sort of on the actual performance. Well, maybe it's going to get better next month, we'll see. But the actual performance is pretty crummy, so it's low on the quadrants. But the expected performance is we want it to be super intelligence, but it isn't. So it's sort of in the wrong part of the graph. Whereas something like ChatGPT or AlphaGo, these breakthrough technologies, we don't expect them to be very smart. They're on the left side, but they actually way outperform how we thought they were going to operate, and they surprise us. And this is a constant. It's very difficult to keep track of how good these systems are because it's irreducible. There's no guidebook for what are they supposed to be good at? Well, we don't know. I don't know. The makers don't know. We're figuring it out. So to keep track of the current capabilities, I recommend spending a lot of time online. That's what I do. It seems to be working. And let's sort of look at what these manufacturers and producers are doing. We have image models getting crazy good. We have wearables going everywhere. We have the top right is difficult to represent, but it's an emotional AI. It responds. It's called Hume, and it's an extremely. It sounds like you're talking to a human. It inflects. It reacts to you. We're going to see a ton more of that. Of course, the new GPT-4 voice model does some of that. Robotics obviously isn't going anywhere. My prediction is they're going to remain fairly expensive, the hardware, but the software capabilities will keep skyrocketing, and that's why we're going to see a ton more robots, not just in our factories, but also in services and other places where we're accustomed to talking to humans. And this is the current generation image model. None of these are photos, once again. This is an image model called Flux, came out 2 or 3 weeks ago by now, and is absolutely staggering. I mean, you can't tell it apart from a photo anymore. It's only going to keep getting better. And video has also completely changed. The top right is the famous Twitter video of Will Smith eating spaghetti, which looks absolutely horrible. And then at the bottom, 12 months later, you have something that is indistinguishable from video. You can take pictures, turn them into video with a bit of prompting, and this is, again, none of this is going away. Wearables, I'm not super bullish on. I don't think they're going to, well, I think our phones are going to swallow up most of the wearable space. We've seen a few hardware entrants trying to work in this space and failing, but it's never too late, obviously. but they're going to be much more present around us. And what I love seeing are national initiatives to actually improve the language capabilities and the model capabilities on a national level. Acacia mentioned a few. Here's one that I found for ChatGPT, which of course uses local language and local contextual knowledge to be a better model, because they all tend to perform very, very poorly on non-English languages. Which is a shame, but it also has to do with sort of how the tokens are attributed and the amount of calculation that goes into translation. It's unfortunate, but it's a characteristic of these models, is that they just work much, much, much better in English. We're going to talk about a metaphor that I've been telling people about for a decade now. It's just the idea of a centaur. So in mythology, you have this idea of a half human, half horse. But in AI, it's going to take on a bit of a different approach, which is over 2 decades ago, in '97, there was a famous chess match between Garry Kasparov, the then grandmaster in chess, and IBM's Deep Blue supercomputer and their marketing team, where they wanted to show that, hey, our chess computers are much better than human players. And the outcome, as some of you might remember, is IBM won. Kasparov had Deep Blues after losing. Deep Blue was the name of the computer. And the outcome that we sort of were told about is, well, since '97 or so, chess computers are much better than human players. And that's kind of the story that we were told. But what I find fascinating is a year later, in '98, in León, in Spain, Kasparov met with his chess buddies, and he said, wait, it doesn't make sense for us to go back home and practice anymore. Computers are going to keep getting better. They were already practicing with computers. Obviously, there had been a practice in chess since forever. But they figured, what if we play together with computers? I play with a computer, you play with a computer, let's see how the game changes. So they created this new category, this new way of doing chess, which is called centaur chess or advanced chess or freestyle chess. He says it was as disturbing as it was exciting, which I think is a good summary. And this notion that together with a computer, you can actually play a whole different game. And it turns out that the best players in the world are no longer, in so-called blind matches where you don't see your opponent, the best players in the world are no longer supercomputers, nor are they grandmasters. In fact, the best players are centaurs. It's knowing your machine better than your opponent. What matters the most, according to Kasparov in his TED Talk, is how well you can interface with the machine. Have you spent your 10,000 hours with your chess computer? Well, that gives you the upper edge. It's not just being a good player, but knowing the systems well. And we're going to see how that matters. If you track actual scores, ELO chess ranking methodology, you see that centaurs are actually outperforming both the best players who reach about 2,900, who are outperformed by the best apps or the best software, who are then outperformed by the best centaurs. That's a bit of a fuzzy line, but in general, my chess nerd friends told me this is true. You get the best players are centaurs. So to generalize it, you can think of it in the sense of AI enhances your general capabilities. It can be applied in very specific places, but at large, it gives you new abilities that would be impossible beforehand. And some practical applications of this. When Netflix purchased the rights to House of Cards over a decade ago, they were moving into custom programming. They wanted to maximize their chances of success, so they purchased House of Cards from BBC, and then they said, okay, we're going to localize, we're going to make it better. But Netflix being a data company, they figured, how do we increase our likelihood of this being a hit? And what they did is they looked at all the underlying data. They looked at viewership. They looked at which tiles on the Netflix home screen people spent most seconds sort of considering to watch something. And they decided things that were usually creative. The color palette, the names of the actors, director photography, even the director, David Fincher, was selected or was shortlisted based on data. So all of these decisions were data-oriented. It was a centaur approach to making creative decisions. The VP of Original Programming says it was about 2/3 gut, right? It's not, don't trust the data blindly. You have to, you're still a human at the end of the day, but ultimately, listen to the data. And the amount of investment going into custom programming is skyrocketing. And of course, every other streamer is doing the same thing now. Everyone's looking at the underlying data and sort of correlating that with how to make our apps stickier. And this was before TikTok. Now, that's just a hypercharged version of it. If you're a programmer, you have to be using Copilot or Cursor or any other development environment that has an AI sitting next to you. On average, people get 50% faster and better and more accurate by using these models or these specific apps. And I found out this week that GitHub is a place where programmers upload code. It's their biggest product, driving massive revenue for something that did not exist 2 years ago. And code, as we'll see later, is an amazing use case for AI. And if you follow football, video-assisted referee is also a form of Centaur, which increases you have cameras on the field helping the referee track what's going on, increasing the accuracy, and of course new systems being produced to improve this as well. This is my favorite slide of the talk. What happens here is if you have a distribution of skill, if you're averagely skilled or low skilled, like we are at most things, right? We're good at a few things, that's what brings us here, but we're average or below average on many, many, many more things. If you're below average, you get a much bigger gain by using AI systems to get you up to average really quickly. If you're a pro, you get a much smaller gain because there's less of a benefit in using them. They're not hitting expert levels as well as experts. Of course, that's going to change, but right now, you upskill the most by using it in places where you're actually weak. And the systems tend to plateau. So like we saw with the use cases, there are, of course, it's not all roses. So they tend to sort of taper off in terms of capability and reach human level, but not necessarily go beyond. It goes beyond in different ways, as we'll see later. And to do a 30-second biology lesson, you might remember this from school, which is there are many forms of symbiosis. There are many ways in nature in which different species interact with each other. You have some very healthy ones where the clownfish hang out with the anemone and everyone benefits. But you also have predatory relationships like our food. They don't know that they're in the same ecosystem as us and that they're being bred for food. And there's a metaphor there somewhere about how we actually use these AI systems and how they revert back to us. So what are the skills you need to know, and how do you spend more time, or how to spend more time with these systems productively in order to increase our skills? I think this is the perfect representation of how LLMs actually work. All they're doing is guessing and guessing and guessing the next word, but to do so extremely well. And there's something magic in that. It looks intelligent, right? So two things that I believe anyone can apply to improve your prompting skills is a practical thing is to simply understand that you have to give it a structure if you want. If you want to get good responses out of your question needs to be good. And one practical way of doing this is sort of give it some context, give it some a preset output format, give it a particular task. So don't, this is a weak prompt, which is write me something about using AI in education, which of course is going to give you a weak response, or it can be super specific. Hey, I'm a professor, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, help my students do this. So the more specificity you give a language model, the better the outcomes. There are diminishing returns, of course, but most people stand to gain a lot from just applying this to their question asking model. And the other thing that you absolutely cannot ignore is use different models, or use the same model over and over again. Both work. So if you feel stuck, try a different AI model, or just ask the same question again and again and again and again, because it's non-deterministic. You're going to get different responses out of it. Therefore, you actually learn quite a bit of how the systems are wired simply from asking the same questions over and over. And follow-up questions are amazing. The one thing, the one in pink, is unmissable. What else should I know? You've asked something, it's giving you responses. You feel like you're ready to move on. Ask what else you should know. It's going to give you things. It's going to fill you out. Maybe you knew them, maybe you didn't. You're likely to learn something. If you're responsible for AI in your organization, this is sort of a high-level overview of the outcomes you're going to gain. But I think the meme on the right speaks louder than words. So, yeah, I think I hear from the laughters that it's picked up, that it's worked, but the introvert with AI, the people who can get a lot of stuff done, the 5-person companies, the 1-person companies are gonna be the next big thing. There's no way around it. And we're gonna see why when we start talking about code in a few chapters. Creative work. We see a lot of work going into image models, obviously, and we used to expect that AI was gonna take over all the easy jobs, right, quote unquote, whereas we realized, no, driving a truck is far from easy, but coming up with a marketing plan actually is easy. Nobody had that on their bingo card 2 years ago, but this is how things turned out. And the creative applications of AI are staggering. They're numerous, and we're going to keep seeing, of course, a lot more of them. This is beautiful AI work by a Singaporean artist called Nice Aunties, which produces all these very, very friendly aunties using AI art. And the fact that these generative models are incredible at coming up and combining different forms of imagery and concepts is something that I sort of appeal for you to explore more. I'll show you what I did. I'm a fan of Tarot, and I figured when DALL-E came out about a year ago, DALL-E 3, like the first decent GPT model for imagery, I figured since it has a language model, let's jump into the language and see what it understands. So in the Tarot, you have a lot of symbology, like you have a lot of variation for each card. I figured let's ask GPT, literally, consider every existing tarot card that you know of the sun, and then design a card that's vertical, blah, 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 that sort of represents it. And that's one of the things that it came up with. And I used sort of iteration. I used the same question over and over again. Never varied the questions, just a card. And of course, every time you ask for a card, it looks different. But you can actually use this to great extent, because if you have a language model that understands, or sorry, an image model that understands language, it can be ridiculously powerful. And you can produce things that look cohesive and coherent. They're all published on something called gptarot.ai. There's no link, but you can find it, or just ask me after. But all of these are generated with DALL-E, and they use accurate symbology. If you ask someone who reads the tarot, like you can actually you can trace every symbol from different places, but it comes together in an unexpected and frankly, pretty hallucinatory way that is also accurate. And of course, we're seeing it in marketing and branding. This was a McDonald's ad, I think, from last week with Japanese artist Kakudrop, if I'm not mistaken. And it's a 15-second clip made for TikTok. And very, very appealing. And of course, I mean, it stops looking like generative art at some point. It just starts looking like any kind of imagery. And what does this mean for copyright? Well, you have some models that are completely unblocked, like Flux, where you get things like this. DALL-E would never do this for you. Like, no, there are too many no-goes here. But of course, some image models are fine with that, and that's not going to stop anyone from coming up with new combinations. Where do we go after creativity? Well, code is the ideal use case for AI. Code is, either it compiles or it doesn't, right? If you write a poem, anyone can interpret that poem in a different way. They can like it, they cannot like it. Code is different. Code, either it works or it doesn't. It's binary. Therefore, these language models are exceptional at code because they can try and try and try until they get it right, until your app runs. And it's a complete game changer. I'm not a programmer. I tried learning programming over the years, completely failed. So I ended up talking to programmers instead of programming myself. But then I figured with these language models, you can actually produce very, very, very solid and reliable output by conversation. So on the right, if you haven't used Claude, I highly recommend it. You have something called Artifact, where you talk on the left, just like GPT. But on the right, it gives you the output. It could be a graph, could be an app. Here someone wrote a calculator app with a line of code, or like with a line of language, right? Karpathy, one of the best teachers in AI, says that the hottest new programming language is English, because that's all you really need to know, and the system makes up for it. And there are numerous apps coming out in this space. Devin is still under wraps and beta, but there are a ton of software developers figuring out, okay, if we can, we can shortcut some of this. We can short-circuit some of the time spent usually and money spent on programmers and actually help people with good ideas pilot and prototype and come up with solutions very, very rapidly. And this, sorry if this looks like a mess, but these are some quotes. This is literally from yesterday. Some quotes. Amazon's chief of cloud say they saved 4,500 developer years of work. 4,500 developer years of work in the last weeks or so, or sorry, in the last year or so, simply by using code completion, things like GitHub Copilot. So it's a massive, it's a massive change, obviously, and it's not going back. What happens after code? Well, we start looking at agency. So software working with software, acting autonomously means they can actually start making decisions. And in general, they're called agents. What's an agent? It's an AI system that looks at the outside world and makes a decision based on what it's seeing. It receives feedback. Based on what it's seeing, it behaves differently, and it acts based on an original desired outcome. It changes its behavior depending on what's actually happening. Our AI systems today don't do that. They just do what we tell them to. But agents are moving in that direction, and we expect to see a ton more of this. The graph on the right is very helpful in this sense. So we used to think about, does this thing work? Oh, no. We're used to thinking about software as being, sort of traditional programs are very narrow and deterministic. They do exactly what we want them to. The app does what you expect it to. Specialized agents like we have now, they're becoming a little bit more autonomous and a little bit more general. In other words, they can do things on their own, but they're also more capable, right? They go from narrow to general. And if we follow that trajectory up, we get to artificial general intelligence, which we'll see in a bit, which seems to me like an inevitability at this point, is in the next few years, maybe decade, we're going to see a lot more general systems, which are basically agents working with agents, making decisions for those who decide for them. And in terms of job replacement, of course it's going to be massive. The pink line is an average of how much of work can be automated, which is bordering on 30%. And you have responsibilities like office, legal, and engineering, which are nudging on 50% of replaceability, according to Goldman Sachs. We see specific applications of this. There's an MIT started company called Presto, which replaces the person on the other side of a drive-through with an AI. It's friendlier, the radio works better, you hear them, they hear you, and you don't know any better. And it simply, it fills in that space for you, especially in places which have very low desirability for work, such as fast food. And Google's or Alphabet's big bet into self-driving vehicles with Waymo, the amount of miles driven every year, every semester keeps going up, and it's not going to slow down. We move towards general intelligence, and this is where we take off. So what is general intelligence? Well, for starters, there's no roadmap for general intelligence. There's no one definitive take on it. General intelligence has many, many different meanings, but let's do sort of a crash course on what it might entail. OpenAI says it's about performing human abilities much, much better than actual humans, and I think that's one of the better definitions. In other words, right now, as we've seen, AI systems are like, at best, they're as good as an average person, sometimes an expert, but rarely better. When they start becoming better than the experts, then that's going to be very different, right? It's very difficult to see what happens after that change. And this is especially true because there are so many dimensions of intelligence. We tend to think about intelligence as sort of knowledge, but of course having interaction, having embodied intelligence, being autonomous, all of these qualities are forms of intelligence. So to have a truly autonomous system with general capacity means you have to check all these boxes. And our systems are nowhere close to that today. But let's go back to my favorite slide, which is combining all of these types of AI, we're going to get there. So it's not generative AI that will be general. It's also not the number crunching. It's not just the autonomous systems. All of them working together, plus a bunch of unknowns, which we haven't really seen yet. Those will be general intelligence. Because as we saw with agents, once an AI can tap into another AI and say, hey, I'm limited in this, but maybe this system is much better, then you start seeing real takeoff. And that gets us to something called superintelligence, which is sort of the what happens after the systems become better than us. So when they can either have general capacities, but also individually they can be super intelligent, which means they can far, far, far outperform anything that we're capable of doing, to the degree where we're gonna look like ants to these systems. And this is, in my opinion, extremely likely. Whether we'll see it in our lifetimes, our kids' lifetimes, or next month remains to be seen, but it's all heading in this direction. There are some attempts to figure out when this is happening. This is a prediction market, which is currently betting on 2032 for general intelligence, given a specific set of definitions. And whether this is actually taking place or not, again, remains to be seen. But I find it interesting that experts tend to converge a few years out. And there are so much speculation in this space. Will systems whether the systems will keep growing in capability exponentially or not, or whether they're going to taper off and slow down, remains to be seen. But a lot of people are pouring a lot of money and a lot of energy and a lot of heat into making them work. So it's extremely unlikely that they won't. And we're seeing sparks of general intelligence since really the advent of GPT-4. That was really a game changer. I believe everyone in AI more or less agrees that the capabilities that we've seen in the last 18 months or so with GPT-4 have the first sort of sparks into like, hey, maybe this is acting beyond what we programmed it to do. Maybe it's actually generating new capabilities that we did not anticipate. If you're a business owner, here's a very quick checklist of things to keep in mind. Hope you can see it. Of things to keep in mind when preparing your own strategy. And much of this is common sense, but I suppose none of you, or few of you, have asked yourselves what it actually means to be on the other side of this change. So I figured it could be a good starting point. And all of this is applicable as well to your general skills today. You don't have to wait for AGI to be a thing, because maybe you won't even have a job after that. But to prepare and to sort of see what's after the hump, this is a good starting point. And maybe the best example of like an AI-first company, to me, is Ant Financial, part of Ant Group. They have 1 billion users with 10,000 employees. So I don't know about your bank. My bank doesn't have that level of disparity between workers to clients. And they do that by putting AI front and center. They have this wonderful thing called 310. So 3 minutes to apply for a loan, 1 second to approve, and no human intervention whatsoever. And that's helped them grow, obviously. What are the risks? Are there any risks? Of course there's risks. We are rushing through this, but the 5 concepts that I think you should take away from this are, yes, systems hallucinate, which means they're not robust. So robustness is a measure of how stable the outcome is in any generative system. And we know for a fact that they're not fully robust. They're unpredictable by nature. And whether that's going to change, whether we're going to move towards full predictability remains to be seen. And right now, we have to keep in mind that these systems do hallucinate. And we suffer from long term, we're going to suffer if we don't figure out how to align our systems. So alignment is a big, big, big question when it comes to AGI, which is how closely do our human goals match what the AIs are actually doing? Because they're fundamentally biased systems, they all have different ways of doing things that we can't really read into unless we spend sufficient time working with them. And the way to resolve that, in my opinion, is through explainability, which is sort of how are we able to look into what these systems are doing, how was a decision made, and why did the AI system come up with that? And this is where we're going to see a lot of headache if the systems are not sufficiently explainable. What's the end game? What is in it for all of us? Will we move towards a society of robots? This is a selection of photos of what robots look like in popular culture. There are, of course, many variations of it, but there's like this constant fascination of ours of like, yeah, maybe everything will become fully autonomous and we're just going to talk to things that look like humans. Maybe in our lifetimes, maybe not. But I think it's a good representation of this is how we think about them, and this is what they're looking like now. So I think there are sparks of AGI in places where we're currently sort of infusing more and more intelligence. So maybe it's a robotic barista, maybe it's drones and systems that are far more capable on their own and are actually making much better decisions than the people on the ground and the humans in the loop would be able to do on their own. What does it look like when every company is a sparkly AI company? These are all real screenshots. Again, I spend way too much time online tracking these. That's a washing machine by Samsung on the right, optimizing your wash with AI. Whether that works or not is beside the point. What matters is, of course, it's going to go everywhere. And of course, it's going to be employed in places that we can't even imagine, that we don't really see. To really wrap things up, because we're in the last few seconds before takeoff, amazing interview with Eric Schmidt a few days ago. And Eric Schmidt used to be CEO of Google, and he's left the company a while ago. And he touches on 3 sort of key technologies that are a bit more advanced, but if you're still with me, let's go through them, which is the idea of, these 3 technologies, according to him, is what's going to get us to take off. So the idea of an increasing context window. The context window is how much information can fit in the prompt. A lot of data goes into the prompt before what you type. But those context windows keep growing and growing and growing, and they're reaching towards infinity. If you drop too much text into GPT-4, it's going to tell you, wait, do something shorter. You have models like Gemini, which you can feed entire books into. The context windows will keep increasing because our computational capability keeps going up. Chain of thought means you can connect different abilities to each other. So one set of ideas can build on another, which leads us to text to action, which is you have wording, concepts, which move towards autonomy, which is the idea of agency. These 3 developments, I wouldn't even call them trends or technologies, they're more like characteristics and abilities of AI, together will get us to AGI. What do you do now? In your capacity as a business owner or responsible for a business, do figure out what data is available. This is going to be your biggest leverage point. Only you have access to that data. Figure out what you own, or if you don't own it, who owns it? What can you do with it? What are your rights to it? Figure out what you're looking to automate, because it's easy to sort of jump head first and want to do a bit of everything. Not going to fly. You won't have time. So decide, have a strategy or a heuristic to figure out where to focus and where to start. And my personal favorite is really like figure out where you want to augment your abilities instead of replacing them. Think like a centaur. Don't try to be a better chess computer. Try to use the chess computer to be a better chess player is the only way forward, in my opinion. We're not going to be better computers than the computers. That's not how it works. Self-promotion, if you like this, I write a weekly newsletter. That's where you scan it. That's where you find it. And the fun of this has been I spend a lot of time listening to interviews by fellow CEOs, deep dives, podcasts, and talking to people who are actually working in this space. So I figured let's build something around it. So it's a way of channeling some of these outcomes in a sort of in a weekly chunky format with many of the highlights. And there's a lovely WhatsApp community built around it where people who sort of like this line of thinking are sharing their own learnings. So I'd love to see you in that community, or at least in the newsletter, if this resonates. Again, if this is useful. If not, well, I'm sorry. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Michel, for providing us with a talk that is technical, forward-looking, and personal. In summary, there's a lot that Michel's talked about, but his presentation equips leaders with the practical AI skills to enhance decision-making process and bridge gaps between the technical and business sides. He covers a wide variety of topics, but for instance, some of it includes accelerating tech changes and its impact on expectations, the centaur concept of the human-AI synergy, and the ethical considerations of AI developments.